There's no place. It's okay. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Having a fun tour. Some of our tours have been great. We'll just give it a minute more. Were any of you at the Pleasant Hill, Kentucky meeting? Okay, I guess we can start. So, the reason I asked if many of you were at the Pleasant Hill, Kentucky meeting is because that's how this came about. Ordinarily, I do research on industry in the Syracuse, New York area because that's where I'm from. But our theme, of course, for Pleasant Hill, Kentucky was anything shaker. And we do have shaker communities in, can everyone hear me okay? We do have a lot of shaker communities, or did.
You move over this
You
side.
want to move over here?
I think I can probably hear you better.
Okay, that's fine. Very good. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I picked shaker seeds because they were formulated and begun in Waverly, New York, which is down near Albany. And I thought it was interesting that when you go to the garden center and you buy a package of seeds today, this concept was invented by the shakers. So I'm going to tell you their story today. If you have questions, feel free to ask at any time. Actually, this display was set up to be a display and not a lecture, so I don't have a PowerPoint. We're just going to go with like, what's here. And you know, I mean, it was 1700, so PowerPoint. Are you Familiar with the Shaker communities? Let me give you just a brief overview. They were a religious sect, okay? This mother Ann Lee came over from England with her followers. And they set up this community, this little community in what was Niskayuna back then, now Waterville, New York. Albany, New York. They were a very self-sustaining group. They grew everything, they made everything in-house. They didn't want to deal with the outside world if they didn't have to. They didn't use, our doctors. I mean, they were very good at what they did. Of course, if they had a child or someone who was seriously ill, they did go outside to the doctors outside their community. Their precepts were perfection of life, celibacy, which ultimately ended their reign, and confession. They believed in confessing to someone in their community of their own sex, but it was a way for them to commune with God. They felt that that was what they needed to do. Their buildings, although they worked and they did meetings and singing together, their buildings, like their dormitories and other buildings, there were 2 sets of stairs, 2 sets of doors, so males and females were separated. When children were brought into the group, the boys would go to the male dormitories and the women would take care of the girls. So the men were basically bringing up the little boys because of the separation of sexes. Their lives were very structured in that, they had this agenda every day in their worship, in their singing, in their lifestyle, in their dress. They were told that they should never have a mirror more than 12 by 18 because it was vain. You were not to do that. They discouraged any kind of decoration in their dress, and as you know, in their architecture, in their furniture, in their everyday items like basketry and shaker boxes. They were very clean. They also, interestingly enough, color, the beds were preferred to be green. The buildings were preferred to be white or yellow. So they even honed in on that. Because celibacy was their belief, that they followed, new members were brought in, a lot of them widows, a lot of them orphans. There were some men who joined the group, but they all knew that they were going to be separated and not allowed to commune with the other sex. And like I said, ultimately that was their demise. One of Mother Ann's quotes that I just love when you think about what they made, and everything that they did, was do your work as though it were to last 1,000 years and you were to die tomorrow. So I think that kind of says it all for, how they lived, which was, they were very industrious working. Everyone knew that. The other Shaker groups, actually Waterville was the first, and then the other Shaker groups were expanded. Hancock, Tyringham, Harvard, and Shirley, Massachusetts, Canterbury and Enfield, New Hampshire, Enfield, Connecticut, Alfred and San Birthday Lake, Maine. And by 1805, they started to move westward into Ohio and Kentucky. It was, it was a popular sect, really. By the mid-1800s, there were 5,000 Shakers. And they held upwards towards 60,000 acres of land in these communities. So because of their simplicity and their exceptional workmanship, shaker things today have become, very desired. People want to study them, they want to buy the furniture, they remake the furniture. So there's several categories we could explore: furniture, architecture, textiles, pantry boxes, baskets, etc., etc. But today we're going to focus in on their seed business. The shakers were the first to package them in these little envelopes. And I found that interesting because no one ever thinks about it. It's a simple inventions that are timeless. So it began in 1790 in Waterville. Brother Joseph Turner of Waterville assigned 2 acres for vegetable seed production. He is the first known shaker to package seeds for sale. In 1795, so 5 years later, the neighboring New Lebanon, New York community started selling packaged seeds as well. They eventually become more productive than Waterville, but New Lebanon becomes seed central. Hancock, Mass, and Enfield, New Hampshire produced till about the mid-1800s, and Mount Lebanon until almost 1900. So your first packages, which I don't have one here, they were just plain brown paper, and they would write the name of the seed on the front. And they were folded and glued by hand, so it was labor intensive what they were doing. Eventually, other shaker communities got interested in this business as it blossomed. And Sabbath Day Lake in Maine started to work on presses so that they could do these type of color, and they were grown into labels, and they would put them on the boxes, the seed boxes that would go out for sale, as well as, their seed packets. They became, the artistry just became phenomenal. So, how did they get to market? Because the shakers ordinarily would not be in the outside world. So they would have one trusted member in each community who would deal with the outside world. He would be knowing how to talk to vendors, storekeepers, general stores, markets, and they would load up his wagon with these boxes. They made the boxes, they would load these up, and he would take them by wagon to the local marketry, so like a general store, and set them on the counter. And it was an arrangement with the owner that they would sell the seeds for them on a commission basis. At the end of the planting season, they would come back and retrieve their box and any unsold seed, and then they'd do it again next year. So, the box held, I don't have an original box because I can't afford one. They are extremely expensive. So this box I kind of retrofitted with their labels, and the seeds don't fit, but it'll do. You kind of get the general idea of what they were using on the counter. And so they would hold, their shaker seed boxes held 200 packets. They sold for 5 cents and 6 cents each. In 1800, 12 different seeds were available. By 1890, over 100 different seeds were available. So they were expanding in leaps and bounds. In 1790 to 1810, onion seeds sold the best. Brother Artemis Markham sold 200 plus pounds of onion in 1795. From 1846 to 70, New Lebanon community averaged over 100,000 packets a year in production. This was a major industry for them, moneymaker, which is why they could have 60,000 acres of land that they could purchase. Vegetable seeds were the primary, but they also did flowers, grass, and they had an interesting herbal business. That would be a whole other talk of their herbal gardens and their medicinal purposes for herbs. The height of production was 1840. So popping ahead a little bit to 1873, these were the varieties. So not just one tomato, 8 varieties of tomatoes, 7 varieties of turnip, 6 lettuce, 9 squash, 11 cabbage, 16 peas, and 15 beans. So were they not, they were even expanding into the types of each vegetable that they were selling. And their success, again, was because everyone knew what they did in their seed production was the ultimate. I mean, they were perfect at what they did. So, you know, their pollination was, you know, just wonderful. The Shakers produced seed for almost 100 years. And like I said, we were out in Pleasant Hill, Kentucky. They did have seed production there, not as much as what went on in New York State. And when we did the program out in Kentucky, my late husband reproduced an original shaker box that would be proportionate to what they had. But you know, this, when you look at what they did, you know, it's just amazing. I can't believe that they grew that far that quickly. But by 1897, now it's been almost 100 years that they've been doing this, they know their population is decreasing. They don't have the people to work it. So they've hired, now they started hiring outside people to work, but it's not going to work. So now in 1897, they're looking to discontinue their business. Competitors that were working against them, better transportation, advertising, you know. They just kind of seen the handwriting on the wall, so to speak. The Shakers did, which again, I don't have any. I brought some seed catalogs here today that were much later. But the Shakers did produce catalogs, and they produced gardening guides. I'm sure if you look on the internet and you find any, they're going to be very, very expensive. As well as a seed packet. I know the last time I looked, one seed packet that was an original seed packet was selling in the range of $200 or $300. The boxes are selling upwards towards $2,000, $2,500. So yeah, it's become very popular. You know, I wanted to get back down to Waterville and talk to them further because I did not get into their inner archives, and I still want to do that. But I just, you know, tried to put this together with what I could find, and it's a fascinating story. So one of the men, or one of the families, I should say, who came and joined the Waterville Shakers, his name was Crosman. Now, I don't know if any of you are familiar. Crosman Seeds still operates today. They're out of Rochester, New York. And their family were Shakers. And he left the community, and you know, he founded his seed company, not that much longer, but 1838, Charles Frederick Crosman passed the company to his 2 sons in 1866. So they were early seed producers, but that's where he got it from. That's where he learned his trade, was through that Shaker community at Waterville. And like I said, you can Google them today, you'll see that they, you know, actually are quite prevalent in the seed business. About the packaging, now I mentioned how simple the Shakers were in their dress, in their architecture, in their furniture. But look at the artwork on these packages. extremely elaborate, colorful. I mean, they knew how to market. And this, yes. Do you have a question?
Yes, did each community design with silk screen their own labels, or did they farm out to the world to be printed?
I think, wonderfully in New Lebanon, we're producing the seed. Sabbath Day Lake in Maine, we're making the presses to do and the artwork. So it was a joint venture, yes.
So they did have it printed outside of the community?
Yeah, in Sabbath Day Lake, yeah. I don't think they had a printing house in Waterloo.
I have a food label from one of the museums, and I was wondering if you have any idea of when they moved into processed food.
I don't, I'm not sure. Like I said, I want to get more into their archives at Waterloo and looking to see exactly, how their process was done. But, you look at the color, I mean, that's marketing at its best. That's what I did for a living. I was a merchandiser. So I'm looking at that seed packet. That's going to attract a buyer more than a plain brown wrapper with a seed name on it. So they knew their marketing as well.
Denise, did they do any hybridizing? Or was it straight,
It was, no,
straight pollination?
they weren't hybrid, no, they were not hybrid. No.
I don't know where the whole hybridizing was on the
Yeah.
timeline.
Yeah, I'm not sure about hybridizing.
Hybridizing started in the 1930s.
Okay.
So it's relatively late. It was a product of the fact that the population of the United States was growing, and they needed to improve food production, and they had suffered with the droughts in the Southwest and that kind of thing.
And I
So
would
they were
imagine,
looking to improve the quality of wheats and grains primarily with the early hybridization.
right, and I would imagine that was, and also part of their demise was that Crosman, for instance, in Rochester, he's probably going to go into hybridizing in the 30s. And transportation was another issue. They didn't have the ability to transport like, these other companies that come into being. So, I didn't do a lot of study on seeds per se. I was focusing on just how they marketed the seeds. But I did look at the hybrid issue. And it says that hybrids are produced from two varieties, okay? They'll produce seed that it's either sterile or will start to revert back to its original parent plant. So heirloom seeds must be a minimum of 50 years old, and they're always open pollinated. So open pollinated seed is produced from plants properly saved, and they will produce the same variety every year. So that's the difference of hybrids versus, versus your. So all of the pictures up here were taken at Pleasant Hill, Kentucky. I can't say enough about that. That was an amazing place to go. Just if you get a chance to go out there, you should go check it out, because you can stay there, and you actually stay in the original buildings, and it's decorated with reproduction Shaker furniture, and there are no dressers. Everything's hung on the walls on hooks. It's really fun. So talking about the other seed producers after the Shakers sort of give up the ghost, there were many. I mean, I'm sure, Ferry Morris, which I'm sure you all have heard of, they started in 1879. Burpee, 1876. Rice, 1844. The top 10 seed companies, the top one obviously is Monsanto. It's holding 23% of the global market. DuPont is 15% and Land O'Lakes is 4%. I don't know where Crosman falls into that. There was another very early seed maker or producer. It was David Landreth, and he was out of Philadelphia. But he traded with the Shakers, but he really sold his seeds not to the public in a format like this, but to cities and townships. So he wasn't marketing them to individuals. And you know, again, it's just, to me, fascinating that here we are in 2023, and we're still using an invention that the Shakers made of put the little seed in the packet, put it in the little seed box, and sell it at the store. So, I want you guys to come over and look. I've got a few Shaker books up here for you guys to check out. I have photographs. You can check out the seed catalogs. This little Shaker story was done by one of the sisters at Canterbury. That's kind of neat. And I want you guys to take a seed packet home with you. So these seeds over here, free to take what you want. These seeds over here, of course, are current for this year. Now these seeds come out of New York State, not far from me. These seeds over on this side are last year's seeds. If you want to take some of these and try them, you're free to. I had another lecture last year scheduled that got canceled because of COVID. So I have all these other seeds from the other lecture. But these guys over here are current this year's. Any questions?
Yeah, sources of information. You see
Sources of information?
libraries. Is Chatham? Is there stuff in Chatham?
There should be, but I didn't.
You haven't gotten into Chatham?
I haven't gotten into Chatham. They weren't listed as one of the top seed producers, so I didn't. You know, I visited Waterville, talked to some of the people, but I did not get into their archives like I'd like to. Yes?
Are your seeds open pollinated?
These seeds here,
Yeah.
you know what? I didn't look.
It's really interesting in the, as a gardener and as a person who grew up with open pollinated seeds, I found it very interesting that there are very few producers or sellers that focus in on open pollinated seeds. The one that I'm using right now is they're called Soda True Seeds. They're all open pollinated. They're run by a cooperative, or all the employees are owners of the business, and they operate out of Asheville, North Carolina. And have very good success with their seeds. So if you're into hybrid seeds, for me, if you get germination rates of anywhere over 70%, you're doing pretty well. With the open pollinated stuff, I've seen almost 95% germination. So it's a very different world, hybrid versus open pollinated.
Versus, yeah. I'm not sure. It doesn't say. I mean, this little company is in Greene, New York, which is maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours south of Syracuse. But the only thing it says on here is non-genetically engineered.
Yeah.
Which you see a lot today, you know.
The history of seed purchasing in this country after the Revolutionary War, was this the only company?
I'm sorry,
Was this the only company that was selling seeds after the Revolutionary War?
after the war,
Revolutionary.
Revolutionary War.
Yeah, because before that, they had to purchase everything from England. But after the Revolutionary War, was this the only company that was producing seeds in this country?
You know what? They didn't talk a lot about wartime. Of course, they came here 1776. That's when this guy was founded. So it was close, you know, right into their.
So that they did after that.
Yeah. And, you know, and the seed production was 5 years later, so, yeah, I mean, the revolution was already.
Remember the last Shaker time, what happened to the real estate?
There are still 2. As far as I know, there are still 2. There were 3 men recruited back in the 1970s. I think there's one or two left.
So that shaker was all real estate?
But they're in, which,
I think they're in Sabbath Day.
they're in Sabbath Day, right?
And, yeah, well, the problem that happened was, and it was a bit of a schism among the communities, is that the male members were dying out. And it was decided by Shaker National, for want of a better word, to close people signing the covenant, which most of the communities agreed with. There were Shakers who disagreed and moved from one community to another. But Sabbath Day Lake was, and they were one of the later communities. Sabbath Day Lake, the people that were the elders there, said, if somebody wants to be a Shaker, how can we deny that? So they continued on with people coming in very slowly. But officially they couldn't be Shakers because the covenant had been closed by Shaker National. But there were a number of women and men in the Sabbath Day Lake Maine community until quite recently, and I'm not sure what the status was. The next living ones were at New Hampshire. What's the
Canterbury.
Canterbury. We're at Canterbury, and there were a couple or 3 women there.
Right.
And we went one time, like looking at the California Congress. Are they going to be here tomorrow? But anyway, they have died out there. But as you say, I think there's some men, but you know, if you wanted to do how many angels can dance on the head of a pin debate, are they Shakers or not?
Or not. And I think this sister, this Shaker sister, who was from Canterbury, addresses that.
Well, I worked with a guy, so this would have been probably in the 90s.
Okay.
He was younger than I was, whose mother had been raised taken in as an orphan and raised by the Shakers. So what are we talking? Probably in the 40s or so.
Yeah.
There was a larger community there. And he said his mother said it was wonderful to be a kid in the Shaker community.
Oh, they took care of everything well.
But that's all I know.
Anyone else? Well, thank you guys so much. Feel free to come up and take a package of seeds.